This is a painting of the coronation of Queen Mary II and King William III of England. It was the first time in English history that a king and a queen were crowned as equal monarchs. This was unusual enough, but there's something else. Look at the man kneeling before them and showing them a document. Who is he, and what is the document? This coronation marked a massive turning point in the history of England, Britain, and perhaps the world, but we need to go back to understand why all this happened and what it meant.
Hello and welcome to episode 8 of my History of English series, Who's in Charge? If you enjoyed this episode, please click the like button, and if you haven't done so already, please click the subscribe and notifications bell. Okay, let's go.
In episode 5, we saw how the English Civil War resulted in a brief Republican government. After the restoration of the monarchy, the next king survived by being much more respectful to Parliament. There was another problem. This was a period of conflict between Catholic and Protestant Europe, and while this conflict was more complex than many people believe, it is true to say that at that time it was very difficult, if not impossible, to separate religion from politics, just as it is the case in many parts of the world to this day. In England, there was a suspicion that the new king, Charles II, was a secret Catholic, and this led to doubts about his loyalty to the people. With the accession of his brother James II to the throne in 1685, the suspicion became a certainty. James made no secret of the fact that he was a Catholic. To give you an idea, this would have been like a member of the Communist Party taking control of the White House during the Cold War. However, many people took comfort from the fact that the next in line to the throne, James's daughter, Mary, was a staunch Protestant. Mary was married to Prince William of Orange, the stadtholder of the Netherlands. The stadtholder was a kind of de facto head of state, and he was also a very staunch Protestant. People believed that whatever James did would be short-lived because the throne would pass to his Protestant daughter. However, in 1688, James's second wife apparently gave birth to a son, and there was suddenly the prospect of a new Catholic dynasty in England. This changed the situation completely. To cut a long story short, a delegation went to the Netherlands to offer the throne to James's son-in-law. They might have offered the throne to Mary, but William would have been the power behind the throne in any case. A bit of context here. Although the Dutch Republic was small, with very few natural resources, it had become a major European and global power. It was, as they say in these days, able to punch well above its weight. This was because it had developed institutions of a modern state that we take for granted these days. Things like a central bank, a stock market, a national debt. Most countries in this period were absolute monarchies, and investors or even their own citizens were rightly wary of lending money to such governments. Instead, property was sacred in the Netherlands, and the state had to pay its debts just like everyone else. Money flowed in. At this time, William and the Dutch Republic were facing increasing threats from an expanding and more aggressive France, and the idea of a newly Catholic England as an ally of France was something that William and the Dutch people would not have welcomed. For this reason, the Dutch government agreed to invade England with the consent of a large proportion of the population. In November 1688, a fleet and an army departed from the Netherlands and sailed for England. They landed in Brixton in Torbay in the county of Devonshire in southwest England. It was a deliberate calculation not to land too close to the capital. William only had a small army, and there was no way he could have taken control of Britain if the British population had opposed him. By landing in the southwest of England and advancing slowly, he gave time for the population to change sides. This is indeed what happened. The aristocrats and the military leaders changed their loyalty with what could be described as indecent haste. At the same time, the general population rioted against representatives of James's government. In a short time, James was on a ship heading for exile in France because he was afraid he would be executed like his father had been 40 years earlier. Before William or his wife could be crowned as monarchs of England, Scotland, and Ireland, they had to come to terms with the parliaments of the three kingdoms. The relationship between the monarchy and Parliament had to be settled once and for all. There would be no more absolute monarchy, no more civil wars. The result was a compromise after a long period of negotiation. This brings us back to the painting we started with. It shows William and Mary looking at a document. It is in fact a document of protest by Parliament. The message of this painting is that they could become king and queen only on condition that they accepted the conditions written in that document. These conditions, which they accepted, are the basis of the Bill of Rights, which in a country like Britain, which does not have a written constitution, is the next best thing. It guarantees a lot of the basic rights we take for granted today. Here is a list of the main points of the Bill of Rights. There were many more. For 17th century Europe, this was pretty strong stuff. But this was just the start. Agreement between the dominant classes of England, Scotland, and Ireland with William of Orange was a marriage of convenience which suited both of them very well. William became king, and in this way he was guaranteed English support against the expansionist ambitions of France. They also divided Southeast Asia between them. The English East India Company was given a free hand in the Indian subcontinent, while the Dutch East India Company got the East Indies, which is now Indonesia. The ruling classes of Britain gained a king who would respect their rights. This had even greater consequences because England and later the United Kingdom adopted the institutions that, as we have seen, were already taken for granted by the Dutch, like the central bank, the national debt, and so on. Censorship was largely abolished. Many other aspects of the absolute monarchy were eliminated from that moment, long before they were done in most of the rest of Europe. The right to private property without fear of arbitrary confiscation was sacred. All of these things were totally alien to the majority of European nations. It has to be said that even today there are nations around the world who do not understand that by guaranteeing various rights, including the right to private property, you make your nation more prosperous. What had been understood, even if imperfectly, was that liberty creates wealth. Liberty and freedom of speech create innovation. Over the following centuries, many innovators, inventors, and scientists from other countries moved to Britain to develop their ideas because they knew their property, whether physical or intellectual, was relatively safe. In effect, the 1688 revolution was just the start of a process which encouraged hands-off government. This type of government spread to many other countries around the world. You only just have to think of the United States. Certainly, a language academy is not hands-off. It's quite the opposite. So who decides what is correct English and what isn't? Who decides what words are English and what words are not? Not the government, that's for sure. Languages that have academies tend to be top-down. In other words, the people in charge manage every aspect of the language. It is we, all English speakers, who make the language, and we make the rules. How this works in practice has changed over time. One thing is sure, it is the individuals, people in general, and not the state or any other body that makes these decisions. So how does a word get into a dictionary? For example, in many countries, the editors of dictionaries will follow the guidance of that country's language academy. In English-speaking countries, the decision about which word goes into the dictionary depends on us, how often that word is used. We look at words in the dictionary because for many people it is the font of all wisdom, at least in terms of language. The irony is that the dictionary compilers are looking at us in the same way.
So the answer to the question in the title, Who's in Charge, is we all are. But how does that work? Well, that's going to be the subject of the next episode, The Bottom-Up Language. Bye for now.